This is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here at the Tanjamakuti in Sri Lanka. This is kind of one of the kutis in the monastery outside of a kind of reservoir. And so got a message from Usha and thought to record a 30-minute or so Dhamma talk for the Ambedkar mission in Toronto, where I had gone before, and for the Full Moon Day program. So I thought that maybe could start with just a little bit of meditation. So can lean forward a little bit and arch the spine, and look about 3 feet in front, and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in, and know when it's going out. If we breathe in a long breath, can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if we breathe in a short breath, can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And if notice any patterns of tension or tightness around the nose or the face, can just let those relax. And when breathing in and out from the tip of the nose, can be helpful to change one's perception of the breath. Sometimes can imagine the breath almost as if it's in front and one is watching it. But instead can change perception so that it's almost like one was right in the center of the breath. Almost like one was standing under a waterfall. So on the in-breath, one can be totally immersed by the breath. On the out-breath, one can be totally immersed by the breath. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill, wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make our minds infinite, can make them unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond. In every dimension, may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And can open our eyes and do a short reflection on the Dhamma, or a half-hour reflection on the Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. So hope that everybody is having a great day, wherever it may be, and to all the people in Toronto. And yeah, so actually, depending on which calendar system one is using, this previous full moon day was the what they call, I think it's the day before the entering of Vassa. I think so. Vassa starts, I think, the following day after this full moon day. And so in the Buddhist time, monks would wander from place to place. They were kind of always homeless, and there were various monasteries around where they could stay. And those monasteries were usually kind of run and arranged by lay people, and the monks would stay there and then provide teachings. So they were kind of very, so they had this kind of wandering lifestyle. And in the time of the Buddha, my understanding, there were other sects that kept this kind of 3-month period of the rains. They didn't wander. But the Buddha's followers in the early days of his career, they would wander around during the rainy season. And I guess in India, this is also the time when people are planting rice. And so they would wander on these people's rice crops, and people started to complain. So the Buddha laid down that one should keep a rains residence. This basically means that one has to stay in one place for 3 months and can't leave that place unless there's specific reasons. For example, if a monk's mother is sick, their father is sick, or a lay follower asks them to come to do something, they can leave for 7 days. Something in the Dhamma. If a lay follower asks them for like a kind of Dhamma request, like they want to dedicate a building or something, then you can leave for 7 days. And there's other reasons too. But other than that, you stay with the same group of people and in the same dwelling for this 3-month period. And so what this is a kind of it's a kind of balance. There's kind of these benefits to wandering, to traveling, but there's also these benefits to stability, to staying in one place, to not going wandering, to being settled, and to devoting oneself to a particular location. Some of those benefits are things that are kind of applicable to everybody. It's kind of when a person stays in the same place for a long time, then they can become kind of familiar. They can develop a kind of routine. When one is kind of always wandering, it's kind of difficult to develop a routine. But if one stays in the same place for too long, then one can end up taking on too many duties and all these kind of things. So one of the aspects of kind of living this way in the same place for 3 months for this whole time is that, basically one tries to develop a routine. So the monks at the beginning of the Vassa will often come up with kind of what they call adhitanas, or kind of determinations. So some monks will take on special practices at that time. Kind of they have this set of 13 dhutanga practices, and oftentimes monks will accelerate their practice and try to take on one of these dhutangas or more. Some of them are like, going for alms every day, sleeping sitting up is a pretty hardcore one. Very few monks do that, but some do. Going for alms every house, eating only one meal, eating out of the bowl, only out of the bowl. Eating only alms food that one gets on alms round, not accepting anything that the lay people bring afterwards, which often tends to be a lot more delicious food. Actually, I came back from alms round the other day and there was like a cheesecake that some lay people had brought. So if one is keeping this practice, then one wouldn't get to eat the cheesecake. And so the carryover for this in lay life and other people's lives outside of a monastic environment is that there are these kind of time periods where it's good to take on a little bit extra in one's meditation practice. There's kind of times when one sets it aside and does more than one usually would. And kind of maybe not the thing that one would do every day, but a bit more than one usually does. I remember when I was first coming to Buddhism, I used to go to this Zen temple, and this Zen temple kind of specialized. They'd have these kind of retreats. It was a good system they had. They would have like sittings on Wednesday and meditation sittings on Sunday, but then kind of the year would be punctuated with these retreats. So there would be these 2 5-day retreats in the summer and in the winter, and they were pretty intense. Actually, that I was grateful for it. I mean, it's kind of very rare to have that opportunity. There was very little walking meditation, and there's maybe, I guess, 7 hours or so. A good amount of time was sitting during the day. So it was just sitting. There was a 10-minute break, half hour sitting, 10-minute break, half hour sitting, 10-minute break, then maybe a 45-minute break. And the 5 days went by like that. And always found that it was interesting that this was obviously more than I would normally do. And kind of in my lay life, there's no way I could have that amount of time for myself. And also the group energy was really supportive. So even to put forth that much effort, I wouldn't have been able to do. But being a kind of special circumstance, it was possible to take that on. And so I did. And always found that what tended to find was that kind of 5 days of intense practice seemed to have this kind of momentum. It seemed to have this kind of like a carry through that would last for maybe 6 months in terms of the happiness in my mind. It was noticeable. If I didn't do them, then it would be a big difference. So having this time when one can go on a retreat, when one can set aside extra time to practice meditation, extra time to devote oneself to spiritual activity is beneficial, especially in lay life when, usually one is working most of the time, one has duties with family. To actually set aside a period of time when one goes on a retreat, puts down all of one's worldly responsibilities for 5 days, for 10 days, and devotes oneself entirely to meditation, ideally in silence, without talking to anybody. This can be something that can carry through in one's life for maybe 6 months after that, and give one the momentum to move forward in one's spiritual practice. So this is one aspect of staying the reins, of staying in one place that's beneficial, that can carry over. Another aspect is that there is this kind of intense things that one can do to train one's mind. One can devote the 5 days to meditation. One can devote the 10 days to meditation. But most of the time, one's life is just kind of, a routine. So this is actually, ironically, this is the other part of a rains retreat that can carry over into lay life, which is that when monks go on a rains retreat, what they usually do, in addition to having these kind of vows, is they're not wandering, they're not traveling during that time, unless there's a serious reason. So what that means is that what one usually will do is establish a routine. It's kind of something that one does every single day, every day, day in, day out, doing this kind of, or what one can do is to establish this routine, kind of do this every day for these 3 months. It's kind of usually connected with some goal. Maybe one wants to read a certain amount of the Sutta Pitaka, maybe one wants to practice meditation for a certain number of hours a day, but then one's day gets structured around that and kind of keeps doing the same thing every day. And the nice thing about this is that there is this kind of aspect where, okay, we do something really intense, it's very hard, kind of notice the results. But there's this other aspect to building up our practice, to building up good qualities in our mind that's a bit more slow, a bit more steady, kind of like, the Buddha gives this simile of a jar, I guess you could say an empty jar, and then drop by drop, we put it under a faucet that's just dripping, 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 then that jar slowly fills up. And it's the same thing when one establishes a routine of kind of doing good in one's life, of practice in one's life. Slowly that helps to build one's practice, build one's kind of good qualities in one's mind, sometimes in a way that's really difficult to even notice until maybe one gets something obvious from it. So the Buddha gives a simile of a farmer. I guess say a farmer or a carpenter maybe. They use an axe or an adze to cut the wood. And eventually when they keep using that axe or adze, the day comes when they realize they've used it so much that their thumbprints have appeared on the wooden handle just from wearing it down. And if they keep using it, the day comes when it's worn through, and kind of when it's totally broken. So in a similar way, when one kind of cultivates these things gradually, slowly, tries to develop good qualities in one's mind, they kind of build like this. And it kind of might seem like nothing big at first, and one starts doing a half-hour meditation in the morning, a half-hour at night, or even 15 minutes at night or half-hour in the morning, and it doesn't seem like much at all. But over a period of, say, years, one can turn back and look and say, I'm much less stressed now than I was before. I'm much more in control of my mind. And this is like seeing the fingerprints on the handle of the adze. This is like seeing the kind of thumbprint and fingers and noticing that something has happened. And this is kind of this aspect of just doing things slowly. So to move forward well in one's spiritual practice, both these things tend to be necessary. One has to have this ability to do things intensely, because there are times when things come up that are intense that one has to deal with. And one also has to have this ability to do things kind of steadily, slowly and steadily, every day, doing the same thing, every day, doing the same thing. Because most of life is like that. It's kind of not going to be doing something really intense all the time. So I remember when I was living at a monastery in Canada, and the head monk there, he was very impressive for what you might call his stability, his kind of his ability to just be stable and kind of keep going with a project or keep going with whatever it might be bit by bit. And he was telling this story about there was a couple monks who did this kind of a bowing pilgrimage for a good amount of time. I think it might have been even up the coast of California. So they would take 3 steps and they would go down on the ground and bow. Another 3 steps, go down on the ground and bow. And I think they did this for an immense, quite a long journey. Kind of, I can't remember what it was, maybe more than 1,000 kilometers or maybe even 2,000, quite some distance. And so they kept doing this, and they actually completed this kind of this journey, very difficult and intense. But then he said one of the monks came back when he finished that. He was just at the monastery and he disrobed, and he was kind of joking. It's like, well, that being at the monastery is an intense compared to doing this 3 steps, 1 bow. But his point, the way he told the story kind of made a big impression on me. His point was that, one has to have this ability to basically be steady, be stable, just keep doing the same thing over and over again, just drop by drop, bit by bit, letting the jar fill up until it overflows. And so kind of remember as well, there is also this aspect, though, where one needs to sometimes have the ability to do things intensely. I remember when I was young and first went to university, and coming from high school, I was just totally unused to the amount of work. It was just this... For one thing, there were no kind of, in high school, there were all these kind of deadlines that one had, so, you'd have like you'd have an assignment, and then, week later, whatever the assignment would be due, and you get marked on that, and then another week there'd be another assignment, then maybe there's a midterm. But in university, there was just maybe sometimes just two things you were marked on for the whole term. It was kind of, you had your midterm and your final exam, or maybe you had one project for the whole term that was worth 70% of your mark, and it was due towards the end of the term. So what that meant was that if one didn't start doing quite a lot of work, working really hard and working intensely right away, and with very little supervision, then one would not be able to complete all those projects. And I still remember my first kind of year of university, kind of going there, and and just when the midterms came up, I was just I had not gotten the time management skills down. I think I dropped a couple courses because it was kind of I hadn't done the intense amount of work, and after that, I kind of trying to maybe learn how to take that skill on. It was intense. It kind of required this drastic change in my lifestyle where, kind of want to get together with a friend and it's like, oh, you want to get together for a coffee? How about next Thursday at 5 p.m.? And that was the amount of time you had. You had that time, 1.5 hours at 5 p.m. the following week. You had to schedule out your kind of, okay, I'll be working out for an hour and a half. I'll be studying for this time. I'll be doing this for this time. I'll be on the train for this time. Kind of basically almost every aspect of your day was kind of planned out to maximize the amount of time that one had to study. And so this was something kind of intense, an intense element that one had to learn. But the thing about it was that intense effort wasn't something that one could really sustain. It had to be linked to a change in lifestyle. So in other words, after kind of getting used to that, it had to keep going. You're going to first year finish, same thing. And still remember by third year or so, after one does something for enough time, it starts to just seem kind of like still it was intense, but, not as intense at the beginning. It starts to seem like a bit of a lifestyle. And so, in Buddhism, there's these kind of various debates sometimes. It kind of, is penetration of the Buddhist teaching sudden? Is penetration of the Buddhist teachings gradual? The Buddha calls his path a gradual path, kind of like there's no sudden drop off in the ocean. It goes down gradually. It's gradual. And yet, the teachers teach us, and there are examples in the canon too, where there's these sudden points to a person's practice. So, it's kind of reading some of these biographies of the what they call Kruba Ajahns in Thai, and they have kind of these very interesting stories. They tend to put the highlights, or in some of those stories, the highlights are there, but what one doesn't see is their kind of routine, day in and day out, 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 to prepare them for the time when they actually do make a breakthrough in the Dhamma. And so this can be a little bit similar to a person going to school, because there is this kind of intense period at the beginning where one has to learn to adjust one's lifestyle. There is this kind of steady period in the middle, and then there is this kind of time that comes when one can graduate from school, when that's the culmination of all one's efforts, all one's knowledge. There is an end to that schooling. It's kind of ideally, there is an end purpose. One gets the kind of diploma. And in a similar way, when one comes to Buddhist practice, what one is looking for is happiness. It's kind of the purpose of our being involved in Buddhism, the purpose of our having a spiritual practice, even the purpose of doing anything. And if one takes on the Buddhist training, one sets oneself up to take that on, then this is something that at the beginning can seem very intense. It's kind of, I know for myself, when I was young, I got kind of, especially in high school, got kind of into partying. And, and so the lifestyle of a kind of partier is kind of very different than the lifestyle that the Buddha recommends. And so when one has these kind of habits, kind of whatever it might be, whether it's, maybe drinking or smoking or anything like that, and one wants to come to find something that's better, then trying to give those things up is intense. Can be a very kind of intense struggle. I remember I used to smoke marijuana when I was young, and there came this time when I thought, this is not a good habit. I better give this habit up. And so I kept trying very hard. Kind of, it was kind of a bit of a struggle, and kind of quitting, and then relapsing and quitting and relapsing, and this kind of went on for about a year. And then finally, I decided, that's it. I'm going to start kind of sprinting down the hill every day. That was one of the things that had missed about starting to smoke, was that I could no longer run in the same way I used to. And so I started this habit of sprinting down the hill every day. Even if I smoked, whatever I did, I would sprint down the hill and sprint back up every day. Sprint down the hill, sprint back up. It's about a kind of 10-minute sprint. And finally, there was this one time when sprinting down the hill, sprinting back up with this kind of big sprint, I ended up getting this kind of really bad, like lung sickness after smoking. And so that was when it finally hit home that, this is kind of, this is something that's going to harm me. But it was this kind of relatively intense period of trying to adopt new habits that I hadn't developed and that weren't there. And so coming to spiritual practice, there is this kind of element of giving up things that we were used to, especially at the beginning when we first come, giving up anything that conflicts with the 5 precepts, giving up killing, giving up stealing, giving up taking intoxicants. All of these things can go very much against the grain of a lifestyle that people are used to. But when one gives those up, then it's not like it's always this kind of super intense effort. After that, there is this period where one slowly learns to cultivate one's spiritual practice. One sets one's life up so that one's doing meditation. One sets one's life up so that maybe one is going to a place like the temple and participating in religious activities, so that one is associating with good friends. And then one learns to have a goal and to gradually start to work towards that goal. And this goal in all of our cases, for all Buddhists, is the ending of suffering, and kind of to achieve the noble attainments, to achieve stream entry, once return, non-returner, and arahantship, to find a way to permanently end our defilements, find a way to permanently end the things that are causing us to suffer. And the work that one does towards this is gradual. It's not something that's necessarily going to be like a kind of a sudden drop-off. So one doesn't go to university and then drink 6 cups of coffee and then kind of work really intensely, not sleep for 6 nights, and then suddenly get a degree. It doesn't work that way. Kind of more, one has to every day develop these habits so that by the end of one's university career, one has put in like thousands of hours of studying, just thousands of hours of doing this, and has developed a lifestyle that will allow one to continue doing that going forward. So in a similar way, this kind of spiritual practice isn't something that's just always going to be really intense. Once we start to have a good solid meditation practice, once we start to associate with good friends, once we start to do things like go to the temple, once we set up this goal that we want to find an end to suffering, then we start to keep doing these things. And kind of they have this word in Pali, I think it's called punapunang, which means again and again. Just kind of again and again doing that, again and again practicing, again and again, just like this kind of carpenter, kind of again and again will strike at the timber, again and again try to chop it, and then eventually they notice the prints on this kind of on this adze that they're using. So in the same kind of activities, like going to the temple on full moon day, like doing acts of generosity to one's family, to wherever it might be, to keeping the precepts all the time, to not breaking them. These are things that seem small, but they're like these kind of drops in this kind of pail of water that gradually fill it up, gradually allow it to rise. And so these things, although they seem small, they're something that grows big, just like this kind of shelf keeps going, or the ocean gradually slopes away and gets deeper. In the same way, these things gradually elevate one's spiritual qualities. And I was kind of, remember hearing, I think they did a study a while ago about the difference between, they studied people who had been in a car crash, I think Harvard studied this, and people who'd won the lottery. And they tracked them, I think, and checked up on them a year later. Maybe whether they tracked them, I don't know, but they at least checked up on them a year later to see how happy they were after those things. And they found, I think, that these people who'd won the lottery were less happy than the people who'd gotten into a car crash. The people who got into a car crash 1 year later on were happier than the people who'd won the lottery 1 year earlier. And so, it's kind of a bit of a bit of an interesting thing, the way that the mind can work in these situations, because just because something is kind of overwhelming, just because something is overwhelmingly good, it doesn't mean that the level of one's mind is raised. It's like this kind of elastic band. One stretches it out, it goes back to its original shape. Just kind of stretch it, goes back to its original shape. In the same way, when a person hasn't cultivated spiritual qualities in their mind, then something good happens to them, something they really like happens to them, and it raises them up for a bit. But then their mind tends to go back to whatever normal level it was. So the way to raise the level of one's mind so that one is consistently experiencing more happiness, so that one's world is consistently better, is to raise it up bit by bit like this, is to develop habits that build into a lifestyle, develop habits that change the way one lives, change the way one thinks. And this is something that isn't always immediate. It's not something that happens in an hour, in a day, even over the course of a retreat, although that can be very beneficial. And there might be some kind of a culmination happening there, but generally these are things that one builds up slowly. You can see whatever habits one has, these are things that come slowly. And so when one trains oneself in these spiritual habits, what one is actually training oneself to do is to gradually raise the level of one's mind, so that one's baseline level of happiness is higher, one's baseline level of calm is higher. And this is something that one uses, kind of uses this kind of happy feeling to try to move forward in their spiritual practice, to try to gain more insights into what it is that's causing one to suffer, what it is that's causing one to be unhappy, and how to overcome that. And the Buddhist teachings contain the answers for this. The Buddhist teachings tell us how to overcome suffering, how to develop greater ways of happiness. And basically the answer to this is to learn to develop this passion for all the things that one might love, one might care about. One learns to separate one's mind from the world bit by bit, the more that one finds a happiness inside. And as one learns to separate one's mind in this way, then one starts to be less affected by the things that happen externally in the world. So if one wins the lottery, one gets into a car crash, these things don't raise or lower the level of one's mind so much. Kind of one isn't so attached to them, one isn't so grabbed onto these things. And one kind of grabs on to external things, and that's when they have the ability to pull one up, that's when they have the ability to pull one down. So our training as Buddhist practitioners, going to temples, practicing dana, practicing meditation, is aimed at the cessation of attachment. This is its end goal. And the cessation of craving, I guess you could say similar to the cessation of attachment. And this is kind of the end goal. And when a person when a person's fetters fall away at any of these four stages, this is actually something that can be very dramatic. It's something that one would never forget. So in the canon it says there's basically three things that a monk never forgets. One is when he goes forth, or three places I think it is that he never forgets. One is when he goes forth as a monk. One is the place where he achieves stream entry. And the last one is the place where he achieves arahantship. These are the three places that he never forgets. Now I remember one time I was staying at a monastery, and there was a senior monk there, very well respected for his spiritual practice. And he said he was talking to somebody one time, and the person he was talking to said, "Oh yeah, I've seen the deathless. I've seen I've seen the deathless. It's no big deal." And he was like, the deathless is a big deal. Or somebody has an experience like that, then that's something that changes their life forever. Their life is never the same after that. And so this is the potential of the Buddhist teachings. It's something that requires us to have this ability to develop things intensely. Requires us to have the ability to set up these determinations, set up these adhitanas that, I won't say, for example, if one is addicted to smoking, I won't smoke. If one is addicted to drinking, I won't drink. You're kind of learning to set even graduated different goals that will help one advance in one's spiritual practice, and then not breaking them. There's kind of this strong determination to achieve. This is kind of this aspect. One can do these things kind of very intensely, especially when one needs to make a big lifestyle change, when one is kind of in a situation where one wants to change many aspects of one's life at one time. Then one has to have this ability to do things intensely, to have this adhitthana. This is similar to the way that monks do things in the Vassa when they take on these extra dhutanga practices. But in addition to this, one also has to have this ability to be steady, kind of to whatever practice one is doing, to just keep doing that day in and day out, watching it build and only changing it when the time is right, when it's ripened. It's kind of similar to somebody going to university. You kind of can't drink 5-6 cups of coffee and stay up for 4 or 5 days and then expect to get a degree. It's kind of that degree comes at the end of maybe 4 or 5 years of a long lifestyle change, and kind of a long-lasting lifestyle change where one is consistently putting effort to do quite a lot of studying, thousands and thousands of hours, or at least a couple thousand, 2, 3, 4, 5,000. I don't know. I never added up the numbers of studying. And the thing about this, though, is that when one employs these two things, when one has this ability to do things very intensely, when the time is right, one has the ability to persevere, doing things steadily when the time is right, when these things are both directed towards a goal, both directed towards the goal of stream entry, of one's return, of non-return, of arahantship, when one has in mind that one wants to direct one's mind towards the end of suffering, then when these things come together, they gradually build. They gradually culminate in these attainments. They gradually culminate in the ending of one's defilements. They gradually culminate in the ending of one's suffering. And this is something that one knows for oneself. And this, as that teacher would say, is a big deal. It's something that one never forgets. One never forgets the place where one achieves stream entry. One never forgets the place where one goes forth as a monk. One never forgets the place that one achieves arahantship. This is where one's goals are fulfilled. This is where one's wishes are fulfilled. And the Buddha says that even if one were to conquer the entire world, you can have all the treasures in the world, be the unrivaled ruler over the world, and to conquer the world even without violence, so that basically everybody loved one, and one was the king over the whole world. They're called people who do this are called wheel-turning monarchs. He said, even if one had that, it wouldn't even equal 1/16 of the achievement of stream entry. Because even if one has all these external things, one has all the gems in the world, one has all the money in the world, one has all the status in the world, all these things are subject to change. And when they change, one's mind changes with them. So long as one is attached to the things in the world, as long as one is attached to praise, as long as one is attached to blame, when these things go up or down, one's mind goes up or down with them. And so it's for that reason that the Buddhist teachings are aimed at the cutting of the cord of these things. They're aimed at turning one's mind away from the world, turning one's mind away from external things, to finding something that doesn't change, to finding something permanent. And this is what we search for in the ending of our defilements. And this is why stream entry is considered to be worth more than conquering the whole world. Because at the end of the day, this world, what the Buddha says about the world is that this whole world is to be found in this fathom-long body. In other words, whatever the world is out there, a person is the one who experiences it. And kind of people sitting in their various locations, if they're at their home, if they're at the temple, wherever it might be, each one of them has a different experience of the world. And so this world, in a sense, is something that we own. It's something that we make. So even if one conquers the world out there, if one hasn't conquered one's inner world, then one can still be unhappy. One can still be unhappy being rich. One can still be unhappy being famous. One can still be unhappy being successful with lots of wealth and power. But for a person who conquers themselves, for a person who conquers this inner world, there's no type of unhappiness at the end of the path that can really touch that person. Kind of that person has separated their mind from things that change and found something permanent. And this is why, this is why people go forth as monks. This is why we come to practice the Buddhist teachings. This is why monks take on these adhitanas at the beginning of Vassa. This is why monks develop these routines at the beginnings of Vassa. It's all aimed at this goal, this end spiritual goal, which is to try to find a true happiness, to try to find a happiness that doesn't change. Because if one gains that, then one doesn't have to worry so much. Even if one wins the lottery, even if one gets into a car crash, irrespective, one remains at ease. And this is a goal that's worthwhile. This is a goal that's worth going for. This is a goal that's worth cultivating intensely when the time is right, that's worth cultivating steadily when the time is right, and that one never regrets when the big times come, when one actually achieves portions of that goal. These are things that one never forgets, and that are worth even more than the conquering of the entire world. Okay, so leave that for reflection, and hope that everybody in Toronto has a great day, and sending all best wishes. Okay, bye for now.